Hey everybody, what's up? For this video, I've decided to play a tight, passive player. Shady Lady 13, her heads up sit and go stats, she's running at about 5% ROI over more than 1400 games, so she looks like a decent sort of solid player. This match is played at the $100 level, actually on full tilt, but I used the PokerStars skin in the replayer for aesthetic reasons. So I hope you enjoy this match, and we'll see how my limping style works against passive players and see how I adjust the style to passive players. Start off the match with 3-2, no surprise. You know what I'm going to do here, limp. Alright, with the board, King, Queen, Queen. I love to attack paired boards, especially if my opponent checks. So I fire out a min bet. And even after the first hand of the match, two things that I've noticed. First of all, she hasn't raised me from the big blind. She's checked the paired board and given it up. Well, that could be three things, depending on how technical you want to get. She's checked the paired board and she's given up when I've bet. So I'm already thinking to myself, tight. A calling station probably would have called my bet. An aggressive player would have attacked the paired board and also possibly raised me from the small blind. So even after one hand, I'm already starting to think tight. But of course, it's early in the match and I'm not going to make a snap judgment. It's just the way my thinking's going already. Jack 5. She limps, so that's two hands, no raises. And I bet the pot, if she is a tight player, there's a good chance that she'll give it up to me. Now that she's called, even though I've got some sort of draw, I'm just going to play it quietly. She bets 40 on the turn, and she can have that, of course. Here I raise, and early in the match, I'm just trying to get a read on my opponent. I do some random sort of moves just to try and see what they're going to do. This is a terrible pot to bet at, or a terrible board to bet at 10, 7, 8 with two clubs, but I'm doing it anyway simply because I want to know more information about my opponent. She folds that up, and at this stage I'm pretty sure I'm dealing with a tight player, and I'm going to put my tight strategy into play, which, as I said, is to play every pot, attack every pot, and get out of her way if she calls. Alright, I've hit top pair, which is nice. Not going to overbet here. Just bet half pot. And she folds, so she's called two min raises, folded twice post flop. And giving all the signs that she's a tight player. Another paired board. And she folds. So when you've got these tight players, as I've said a couple of times, you need to adjust your strategy. And there's two important strategy adjustments that you have to make. First of all, any two cards is plus EV against a tight player. You don't fold pre-flop ever unless they've raised. And second of all, whenever they show interest in a hand, you get out of their way. They're normally betting on decent cards. You have to be, in effect, a lot tighter when they're betting and a lot looser when they're not. Alright, she makes another raise pre-flop. That's fine. And again, so now I'm starting to wonder if she is in fact tight, but of course she shows me ace-king, and that's fine. So it doesn't sort of change my my judgment of her. These are my favorite cards, my favorite flops to attack. High card, middle card, low card. Now that she's called, I give up any interest in the board. And the 9 comes on the river. If I'm very lucky, she'll have the 4 on a worse kicker. Actually occurred to me during the match, and she did. So you can see there she hasn't got out of line there. She hasn't tried to re-raise me, hasn't tried to bluff the river. So all the signs that she's tight. Tight players bluff quite rarely, though of course they will bluff. Here she raises me. This is a very bad situation against a tight player. I think on that board, I mean, I knew I was beaten when I called the raise. I was just hoping to catch two pair, but even if I do, I could still be beaten by 6-8 or Jack-8 or a higher two pair. So pretty ordinary call against an opponent that's acting tight. Ace on the turn and half pot. Yeah, I'm certainly haven't got any more interest in that hand. As soon as she re-raised, I pretty much gave up on it. I just called because I was being priced in. Ace Jack 9. I've got nothing, of course, but I'm going to take a stab. She calls and I've developed a draw. A pretty bad draw if I can catch the queen. And I'm not bluffing. I think the fact that I've checked the turn makes a bluff a pretty bad idea. It's pretty hard to say, oh, actually I do have that card I thought I had. I mean, there's no reason for me to check the turn if I have an ace or a jack. Paired board. And I think she's given up 3 of those. So you can see how profitable attacking paired boards is. And in fact, attacking any board where they haven't shown any interest is always profitable. Raised at 3 times a big blind. She gets out of my way. No surprise there. And once again, I miss. I bet. She calls, so I then show no more interest in the hand. I'm not going to try and bluff. I'm going to take enough pots off this player simply when she folds that little pot stab, that little min bet. No need for me to get out of line. And she bets pot on the river. Doesn't worry me either way because I've got no more interest in the hand. This time I hit a monster. Top 2 pair. I could have maybe checked to try and let her catch up. That's one of the problem with tight players. When you do hit a good hand, you don't get paid off, which is why you really need to be attacking the boards the times that you don't have a good hand, and make sure that you take more than your fair share of those. Here we hit middle pair. And I could have attacked that with King 9, I could have attacked that with King 2, would have been the same result. Tight players simply fold too many hands post-flop, and they telegraph their good hands. It's easy to get out of their way, and it's easy to attack them post-flop and pick up a lot of boards. Jack 7-3. I'm betting 100% of flops against a tight player. And don't like the turn. If she is ahead here, she should have bet and pushed me off the hand once I showed weakness. And perhaps a little bit conservative for me to not bet the river there. But I guess when she only had ace high, I wasn't getting much value anyway. Alright, she chooses to bet this one. Pot size bet. I'm getting out of her way. Here we've got bottom pair. This sort of board where you've got 4, 7, 8 can be unbettable against aggressive players. They'll push you off with any draw. Calling stations are obviously going to call, and you have to work out whether you're getting value from betting a 4 or not. But against a tight player, they're great boards to bet. 7 on the turn, and I try one more bet just to see what she's going to do. When she calls it, I think I'm probably beaten, and that's just to control her, to stop her from doing a sort of big bet on the river, and it turns out my king is good. Sorry, my king 4 is good. The raise there post flop, I got pretty decent value considering I was on bottom pair, and there's a possibility that was a spite raise. When players lose a pot, they get annoyed and sort of make a big raise the next hand. She's not showing it, so yeah, there's some possibility that's what it was. So she may be tight, but sort of prone to cracking. 3 hearts on the board. I have nothing, of course. Bottom pair's not going far on this board. And now that she's called, just check it down. And the 7 on the river is absolutely sort of no help. 4 hearts. This is a very difficult hand to win for me now. 90 on the river. So I have noticed that hands which I bet and she calls and then I check, she will bet the rivers on them. So there might be some trapping potential at some stage also. But she might have been betting because she had a decent hand too. But she's done it 3 or 4 times. It's something I'll think about if the situation arises. Ace Jack 4 is a good flop for me to bet. Sort of a high, middle and low card. Tight players will fold those all day if they don't have the ace. And here we come into a run of hands where I pick up quite a lot of boards through attack, attack, attack. She's missing and she's just folding, folding, folding. Limp Ace Jack suited. I'm sure that'll send shudders through people. But as I've said many times, I'm going to have sort of a lot of surprises post-flop for people that are not expecting me to have Ace Jack suited. Here I've got second pair. She looks weak and takes a stab on the turn. I think the King of Diamonds is a pretty good card for me. Obviously there's chances she could be on a flush, but the king there reduces the chances that she has a king, and the fact that she's checked the river means that I think it's pretty unlikely. So I'm going to make a pretty aggressive bet for value here, and she folds. Another raise. This time I've got King Jack. Not folding. I catch top pair and check it, and she's bet pot. Bit of a difficult situation. Obviously I've got a strong hand and I've got a good draw. She has been tight, but in the last couple of hands she's opened up a little bit. So, you know, I mean, if she's getting a little bit out of line, I'm certainly not folding this. I'm probably not folding this at any stage. I'm just going to call and see what comes on the turn, and I'll make up my mind then. The turn's a 7 of diamonds, which is a pretty awful card. I mean, she could well have something like ace 8. It's not out of the realms of possibility. Then the spade gets completed on the river, and what I'm going to do here, I've got 2 choices. I could fire out a blocking bet, sort of maybe 150, but against some players, if they're good enough, they'll recognize it as a blocking bet and come over the top. Sort of they see that as an invitation to bluff because they understand the nature of blocking bets. I'm just going to check, see what she does, and I'm willing to call probably up to 200 or so if she fires out the river, but hopefully she'll just check. And she does. So an otherwise tight player kind of went a bit mental there for a couple of hands. Once again, the paired board, and you know, this is kind of money in my pocket every time there's a paired board, because she's folded every single one of them. King, king, and she raises. I raised to 270, perhaps that's a little bit too much She folds straight away. Probably that's a good raise against an aggressive player or a calling station, but against a tight player that might be a little bit too much. And on this hand I've got King 2, and the reason that I'm raising now is to stop her from being so aggressive. She's really opened up a lot pre-flop, sort of raising the last 3 or 4 hands, and she's just lost the last hand. I don't want to limp and have her make a spite raise on me of 90 or 120, so I'm taking the initiative here, and I can see that she's getting out of line. An otherwise tight player is acting a little bit aggressively, so in order to put her back in her box, I'm making a raise pre-flop. She calls paired board, and I'm just thinking yum yum yum. Half pot's enough to take it away from her. So those paired boards have just been gold, and she's down to about half a stack. Here I hit mid pair. Obviously I'm betting. She flat calls the 8's a pretty terrible card. And this is a weak bet on my behalf. And now the 3 on the river of clubs. She bets 60, and I'm happy to fold there. It looks like she was betting for value there. She wasn't trying to bluff me off. She could have had 2 pair, she could have already had a straight, or she could have hit the flush, and I don't think my 3rd pair is good there. In the first video you saw me making a lot of call downs against an aggressive player, but someone that's generally tight with occasional moments of sort of getting out of line. I'm not going to be calling what looks like a value bet on the river. Alright, she limps Queen 2. She limps and I've got Queen 2. Another sort of board that you wouldn't bet against an aggressive player, and for once I decide to let her have a pot. You can see that I'm betting nearly every pot if I'm out of position, and every pot if she checks to me when I'm in position. The theory is just attack, 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 and they'll give up too many pots, and they'll get sort of annoyed at the amount of betting that you're doing, and hopefully it'll tilt them and they'll make a mistake. Alright, here I've got nothing, but it's a sort of big middle low flop, if you count the 8 as a middle card. So she's checked, I attack, and she's just given up way too many of those pots, which is nice. So you can see this style against a tight player. You simply attack a lot, they give up too much, and I've taken no risks in the match. I've taken no risks. She's down to 8.55. Whenever she bets, I get out of her way, and she's kind of tried to adjust by getting a little bit more aggressive pre-flop, but her timing hasn't been good, and I've been hitting whenever she's been doing that, and it hasn't worked for her very well. Alright, 10-3. She bets, I get out of her way, no problem, she can have it. I mean, if you look at her play, it doesn't look particularly strong for someone that has a 5% ROI and is playing at the $100 level. So hopefully that'll encourage people that are playing lower than the $100 level to get up here quick. And I'll just go back and look at this hand. Bottom pair, no draw, tight player bets. I'm folding that 100% of the time. Alright, here I've got a draw. She checks, obviously I'm betting. And once again, folds too many hands. It's a good source of chips. While ever you've got a good source of chips, i.e. you can take down a lot of pots post flop, then there's no need to get aggressive or take any risks against a player. Here I check because it's just such an awful flop and let her take it. Alright, pocket fours, I'm not raising. She does, and here I'm just set mining. She's down to half a stack, but the last thing I want to do is double her up. I mean, I'm never ever sort of, when I've got a good source of chips, I've got control of the match, I just hate the idea of doubling them up, giving them a big sort of confidence boost and letting them back into it. And here we've got a fairly interesting situation, one that's going to come up quite a lot. Do you call when they're down to sort of half a stack and you have a draw? She's raised, so let's go through the hand. She's raised pre-flop to 80, and now post-flop there's 160 in there and she shoves. Obviously not pure air. Let's look at the possibilities. I suspect strong possibility of overcards. Sorry, an overpair, not overcards. A strong possibility of an overpair like 8-8 or 9-9. That would really make sense on this board. Also a higher overpair, 10s, jacks, queens, etc. I've got my pair of fours, which I therefore think is worthless, and I'm going to fold it up. The weakest possible hand I would ever put on for this is ace-8, and even then, you know, I just don't think that's very likely, so I'm going to fold it. I'm not taking a risk. So when you've got these people under control, don't double them up. That's sort of a lot of people would take risks when they're low stacked, but she was around 800, and that's not sort of that low stacked. Here I check for once. She's been betting a lot of this when I check. She didn't take the bait, and this is a classic sequence which a lot of players will play. They catch a good hand on the flop, check it, and then make a big bet on the turn. So when you see that sequence from your opponent, quite often they're trapping with a strong hand, and you need to know what it means. You need to understand it, and a lot of players will play it that way. Not all, but a lot of players will. So when you see it from a reasonably tight player, you need to be suspicious and think, oh, hang on, they're probably trapping me. 8 comes on the river, and I'm just trying to get some value here, but that's all I was getting out of the hand. But that was nice. I limp with king 6 suited, miss again, and I'm not really sure why I didn't bet that. I think it was a pretty obvious bet and probably a mistake on my behalf. Player that's folded nearly every hand after she's checked. That's a clear bet, and she punishes me by betting on the turn. So I messed that one up. That was probably my 80 chips, just waiting to be taken. Alright, middle pair. I bet and she folds, which is probably what would have happened on that last hand, so a little bit annoyed at myself for messing that one up. Now you notice that on the first video and the second video I was making nearly no pre-flop raises. Against a tight player I'm opening up my pre-flop range quite a lot. I mean, this is a sort of aggressive pre-flop game from me. A lot of you will be laughing at that idea, that this could actually be aggressive, but for me it's quite aggressive. And as I said, I'm opening up my range because they'll fold so much post-flop that if I can get a bit into the pot, then I'm sort of speeding up the process. And also they'll fold pre-flop quite a bit. Here I hit a monster with king 9, hitting 3 of a kind. Make a little bet to try and get some value, and she folds. Perhaps that 40 bet was too obvious. It sort of made her suspicious. Perhaps I should have just simply checked the hand, but I'm probably not getting anything unless she hits. So, you know, either way, I wasn't getting any more chips. Middle pair again, we're starting to run good. She calls, and now I've hit the jack on the turn, lovely. I disguise it by just betting 40, so it looks like I actually have a draw. And now that the spade comes, I'm going to bet 120, and I expect to be paid off by any time she's got a king. And I think if she had a draw or the 3, I wasn't getting paid anyway, so 120 is just about the right size. I'm taking her to Value Town. And she's got a king. Unlucky, but she could have raised on the flop, and I probably would have folded if she made a big enough raise. So unlucky and also bad play. Now that she's down to 500, just doing the same thing, attacking, staying out of her way when she bets, and being very careful not to double her up. Right, she shoves. That's kind of normal 500 stack behavior. One thing I'll say is that if I catch a good hand at this stage when she's down to 500, I'm not raising pre-flop, I'm limp trapping. Either hoping that she'll make a small raise so I can come over the top, or hoping she just shoves at me. And she's shoving again. That's good. All I need is 2 good cards and I'll end the match. 3-6 is not 2 good cards. Bottom pair, and this is one of those sort of, it's a high-low-low board, but I'm certainly betting it against a tight player. Raising to try and control her. She's just lost a pot, so she might have the shove. She shoves all in for 515. You can see I folded there. King Queen with these blinds, I'm not calling. I think she had, what was that, about 11, 12, almost 13 big blinds. I'm not calling for King Queen. I don't know what Nash says, but, you know, they can bite me. I'm not calling. Queen, Queen. And this is exactly what I was talking about. I limp because I'm hoping she's going to shove. Horrible flop for me with 3 spades and an overcard, of course. I bet. She flat calls me. The 5. This is now getting worse. I bet again. I'm kind of glad she didn't shove me now. I can't see how I'm going to win the hand, seeing she's calling. And beautiful. 7 spades on the river. She bets half pot, and my Queen Queen is going into the muck, and I'm shedding a tear. Fat lot of good they did me. Queen 3. Not a very easy board to bluff with a 10-8-6 on it, so I don't bother. And the 5 doesn't help me either. And after 2 checks, she finally wakes up and takes some initiative and bets. I am attacking a lot of boards, but that's a horrible board to attack. Here I make a little raise. As I said, I open up my raising range against tight players. Another paired flop. I think we've had 5 or 6, and I've won every one with a bet. So obviously here, what am I going to do? I bet. I make it quite a large bet to discourage her from calling. And those paired boards are just gold. I mean, you know, they're money in my pocket. King 10. It's nice that I'm hitting so many cards. We're getting towards the end of this match, and I'm running good. When she bets 80, not really sure what she's on here. Could be an ace, and with her stack, if it's an ace, I'm hoping if I re-raise it, she'll shove at me. If she has a jack or a queen, then I don't want her to see a sort of a cheap turn. And the 80 bet looks a little bit suspicious to me. She's never sort of bet, or she hasn't bet that aggressively on many flops. So I'm just putting her under the hammer. If she wants to call for 240, which is pretty much committing her to the hand, then fine, but I'm not giving her a cheap turn. I don't know what's going to happen. If the turn comes and it's a jack or a queen or an ace, then I hate my hand all of a sudden. So, yeah. She's lost the pot. I raise to control her. And yes, I'm running like God. And here I'm just shoving. If she wants to call on middle pair or bottom pair or a draw, fine. But she doesn't. And that shove was simply because she had a pretty low stack. She shoves all in. Easy fold. Here we get to the last hand of the match, and as I've said before, when they get a good hand and they're low stacked and they're doing a lot of shoving, I'm just limp trapping. I limped with my queen queen, didn't work out so well. This time I limp with ace queen. She shoves, and obviously I'm snap calling, and I get in against queen jack dominated hand, and it runs out pretty quickly there with me hitting second pair and her too, but she's out kicked. So there's a couple of things you can take from this. Firstly, when you're up against a tight player, attack a lot of boards. Second of all, give respect when they're betting, but do look to see if they're spazzing out. And third of all, against pretty much, well, tight players and aggressive players certainly, if you've got good hands and they're shoving quite a lot, then limp trapping can work. You limp in and they either raise you and you can come over the top, or they shove you and you can pick them off. If I'd raised this pre-flop, might have been the same result, but someone that's getting quite shovey towards the end of the match, I like the limp trap sort of strategy. I hope you've enjoyed this video, which shows me against a different player, or more importantly shows my style of play against a different player, winning regular at the $100 level. And until the next one, take care and good luck on the tables.